Thanks very much, Chair, and I too would like to welcome Deputy McNamara's efforts, and I am appreciative of the opportunity to make a few short points in support of it. The first time I had a chance to vote, not today or yesterday, was an opportunity to vote for candidates who stood under the banner of the Army Wives in Kildare, where I'm from, in the 1980s, and that campaign really was the forerunner by the spouses of soldiers to agitate and put on the table very legitimate concerns that Defence Forces personnel had about their wages, about their conditions and so on, which traditionally have been and are today relatively poor, to be honest, in terms of the lack of adequate pay and respect and a voice for our soldiers. And obviously I use my vote to support them, and out of their campaign actually PD Fora emerged as a representative organisation for Army personnel, and I think that has been a hugely positive experience, but I don't think it's enough. I think they have been good at agitating, at putting in the spotlight the very poor conditions of soldiers, where we're on record on the House of saying that numerous soldiers' families have to secure family income supplement to make ends meet. We've had the stories of soldiers sleeping in their cars because barracks have been shut down and allowances haven't been sufficient to enable them to get accommodation and so on. And the idea that these people are not workers, that they're somehow apart, is something that really, I suppose, capitalism as a method of organising society has done, attempted to put guards and soldiers as being separate from other workers. But I do support the idea that they are just workers in uniform, and in that sense their allegiance should be with their fellow workers, and that they should have the right to be represented by a trade union in a real sense. And I think that's important, not just from the point of view of them having the ability to advance their economic position, which I think all workers should have. I think it's doubly the case, as Deputy Wallace said, in this era of austerity, where we have starting rates now for Gardaí and Army personnel which are quite simply an absolute joke. There's a downgrading of these jobs which should be remunerated better than they are. And I find it sickening in the extreme that so-called representative organisations that masquerade as supporting rank-and-file Gardaí would be silent largely on the appalling cutbacks in Garda pay and conditions, and yet are vociferous in their criticisms of those of us in here who try and raise issues of Garda reform. And the idea that Gardaí don't need serious trade union representation, I think, is the argument is won by the inaction of the GRA and the AGSI, who simply, you know, it's funny, I've been a shop steward, still am actually, for many decades, and you often hear workers criticising shop stewards and union officials as being apart from their members, not sufficiently agitating enough for their members' needs and objectives, and that is quite often the case. I think it's really the case in terms of the GRA and the AGSI, who seem to be using that organisation as maybe a vehicle for promoting themselves or something. It's certainly not being used to challenge management by any stretch. And I think that was really vindicated at the time of the GSOC bugging scandals and so on, when former Commissioner Callanan contacted the four Garda representative organisations and asked them to put out a statement condemning GSOC and saying they had no confidence in GSOC, and the AGSI and the GRA happily obliged. They weren't so quick at coming out supporting their own members who stood against the tide, who put the spotlight on some terrible abuses that were being undertaken by some senior Gardaí against citizens and indeed against other Gardaí, and they've been shamefully quiet about some of their own members who, as we speak now, are still in the force and are still enduring poor behaviour because of speaking out about bad practices. So I think this is a really timely, actually, piece of legislation. I think it's very necessary, because we only have to look around at what's been attempted to be done in terms of, say, the water charges protest, for example, where we have been in contact with some senior Gardaí who've actually been very disappointed that they've been asked to ask their members to go out and police and stand watch on the community, in communities where for years they've been attempting to build proper, decent community relations, and yet they've been pitted against residents at a time when they'd prefer to be out dealing with crime and doing the job that some of them signed up to do. And that's a very, very dangerous undermining of the Gardaí. It's undermining the conditions of decent Gardaí who signed up to do a good job and who don't want to be pitted against their neighbours and friends. And the only way in which these people can have a voice is if they're given proper trade union rights and a protection to be able to take a stand. And I do support the right to strike of Defence Forces personnel, and indeed of the Gardaí as well, because I do think that they should see their role as being serving the community and standing alongside residents, not being pitted and apart from their neighbours and friends. So I welcome the debate. I'm glad that it's going on. I think it's important that we advance these issues, and I compliment Deputy McNamara for bringing forward the legislation today.
Thank you, Deputy.